Ethan Cole had three choices: lie down in the dust and die, keep walking until his body made the decision for him, or knock on the only door still standing in this godforsaken ghost town. 4 days without food, three without water, his horse dead 2 miles back. When that cabin door opened and a 10-year-old girl looked him straight in the eye without flinching, he realized dying might have been easier than facing what came next, because Lucy Harper wasn't about to let him waste the life he'd nearly thrown away. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story of second chances and unexpected family travels. And if this opening grabbed you, hit that like button and stay with us until the end. The Colorado plains stretched endless and merciless under a sun that felt personal in its cruelty. Ethan Cole had stopped counting steps somewhere around noon on the third day, stopped thinking clearly on the fourth, and now as the afternoon shadows grew long and sharp, he'd stopped caring whether the dark shapes shimmering on the horizon were real or just his mind's last desperate attempt to give him hope. His boots, good leather ones, the kind a trail boss could be proud of, were held together now by nothing but habit and the memory of better days. Each step cracked the dried mud caked on them, left pieces of his former life scattered across the hard-packed earth. The canteen at his hip had been empty since yesterday morning. He'd tried not to think about that. Tried not to think about the horse either, though the image of Dusty's glazed eyes and foam-flecked muzzle kept surfacing in his mind like a body rising from deep water. He should have shot the animal before it collapsed. Should have done a lot of things differently. The town, if you could call it that, materialized out of the heat haze like a cruel joke. Ethan blinked hard, certain it would dissolve back into nothing, but the structures remained. Weathered wood, broken windows, a main street that looked like God himself had walked away and forgotten to come back. Most of the buildings sagged at angles that defied physics, their doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. But there, at the far end of that forsaken strip of road, sat one cabin that didn't belong to the dying. Fresh paint on the shutters. A porch swept clean. Smoke rising from the chimney in a thin, purposeful line. Life. Ethan's legs decided for him before his brain could argue. They carried him forward with a shambling determination that would have embarrassed him if he'd had the energy for shame. His shadow stretched long and thin beside him, a dark mockery of the man he used to be. 3 years ago, Ethan Cole had led wagon trains through mountain passes that broke lesser men. 2 years ago, he'd walked away from the best job he'd ever had because he'd thought he was smart enough to make his fortune at cards. 1 year ago, he'd learned exactly how wrong a man could be. The porch steps groaned under his weight. Solid wood, well-maintained. Someone cared about this place. That thought felt foreign, almost offensive. In Ethan's recent experience, nobody cared about anything except what you owed them and how fast you could pay. His hand, filthy, trembling, barely recognizable as his own, rose toward the door. Hesitated. A man had some dignity left, didn't he? Some pride that said begging wasn't an option? Then his stomach cramped so hard he nearly doubled over, and pride became a luxury he couldn't afford. His knuckles hit wood 3 times. The sound seemed too loud, too desperate. He waited, swaying slightly, and distantly noted that if nobody answered, he'd probably just sit down right here on this clean porch and let whatever came next come. Footsteps inside. Light, quick. The door opened. Ethan had prepared himself for suspicion, for a shotgun barrel, for a door slammed in his face. He had not prepared himself for a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Brown hair pulled back in a neat braid, a simple calico dress, clean and carefully mended. But it was her eyes that stopped him, gray as winter sky and steady as creek stones. She looked at him the way you'd look at a puzzle, not a threat. Measuring, thinking. "You're dying," she said. Not a question. A diagnosis. Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out but a rasp that might have been agreement. The girl, Lucy, he'd learn later, though in that moment she was just this impossibly composed small human, stepped back and gestured inside. "Come in before you fall down. You're making my porch untidy." He should have questioned it, should have worried about why a child was alone, why she wasn't screaming for help, why she opened the door to a man who probably looked like death's rough draft. But his body had already made the decision, carrying him across the threshold into a room that smelled like bread and wood smoke and something he'd almost forgotten. Home. Sit. She pointed at a chair near the table. Not the good chair by the fire, the one that could be easily cleaned if he bled or collapsed on it. Smart kid. Ethan sat. The chair held. Small miracle. Lucy moved through the cabin with the efficiency of someone 3 times her age. She ladled water from a bucket into a tin cup, brought it to him. Slow, she said. 3 sips, then wait. If you drink it all at once, you'll just bring it back up, and I don't want to clean that. He obeyed. The water hit his throat like salvation and sin mixed together. 3 sips. He waited. His hands shook around the cup. When did you last eat? She was at the stove now, stirring something in a pot that made his stomach twist with longing. 4 days? His voice came out like gravel sliding down a tin roof. Maybe 5. Lost count. Your horse? Dead. You shoot it? Couldn't. The admission burned worse than the thirst had. No gun. Sold it 2 weeks back. Lucy glanced at him over her shoulder, those gray eyes taking in more than any child should have to understand about the ways men fall apart. So you sold your protection for money, then ran out of money before you ran out of wilderness. That's poor planning. Ethan almost laughed. Would have, if his chest didn't feel like it was being crushed by stones. Yeah, I'm full of poor planning lately. She brought him a bowl. Some kind of stew. Thin, but with actual pieces of meat floating in it, chunks of potato, the kind of meal that represented real resources. Eat slow, she instructed again, setting a spoon beside the bowl. Half now. Wait 10 minutes. Then the rest if it stays down. Why are you helping me? The question came out before he could stop it. Lucy sat down across from him, folding her hands on the table like a schoolteacher preparing to explain something obvious. Because you knocked instead of breaking in. Because you waited when I opened the door instead of pushing past me. And because... She paused, studying him with that unnerving directness. Because you look like someone who used to be better than this. That hit him square in the chest, harder than any physical blow. Ethan looked down at the stew, at his filthy hands holding clean ceramic, and felt something crack open inside him that he'd been keeping carefully sealed. I was, he said quietly. Long time ago. Well, Lucy stood, moving back to her work at the counter. People don't stop being what they were. They just forget for a while. Eat your soup. He ate, slowly, like she'd said, letting each spoonful settle before taking the next. The food was simple, but well made, seasoned with herbs he couldn't name. Around the 4th bite, his vision cleared enough to really look at the cabin. Books, everywhere. Stacked on shelves made from crates, piled carefully on a side table, even a few tucked into gaps in the wall where the chinking had come loose. Not children's primers either, real books. He could make out titles from where he sat. Medical practices for remote settings, agricultural innovations, the collected works of Shakespeare. You read all these? He asked. Most of them, some twice. Lucy was slicing bread now, laying pieces on a plate. My parents believed in education, said it was the only thing people couldn't take from you. The past tense sat heavy in the room between them. They're gone, she continued, matter of fact, as commenting on the weather. Cholera, 3 years ago. Took most of the town with it. 47 people in 6 weeks. Ethan's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. You've been alone 3 years? I've been taking care of myself 3 years. That's different from being alone. She brought the bread to the table, set it down. The county sent someone to fetch me twice. First time I hid in the root cellar for 3 days until they left. Second time I met them at the town boundary with my father's rifle and enough legal knowledge about property rights to make them reconsider. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the hunger, the bone-deep weariness of his own failures, Ethan felt his mouth twitch towards something that might have been a smile. You ran off the county with property law? And the rifle, Lucy said. The law was for moral authority. The rifle was for practical emphasis. She sat down again, watching him eat. They haven't been back. I pay my taxes. Keep the place maintained. Don't cause trouble. People mostly leave you alone if you prove you don't need them. But you do need them. The words came out harder than he intended. You're 10 years old. 10 and a half. And I need them less than they'd need me to be convenient. Her jaw set in a way that made her look suddenly much older. The nearest orphanage is in Denver. 3 girls died there last winter from pneumonia because they didn't have adequate heating or medical care. I have both. The alternative placements are either work farms where children labor 14 hours a day, or charitable families who want unpaid servants. I've read the reports, Mr. She paused. You haven't told me your name. Ethan. Ethan Cole. I've read the reports, Mr. Cole. I'm safer and better educated here than I would be anywhere the county could send me. The only thing they could offer is the illusion of conventional propriety, which helps them sleep better but does nothing for my actual well-being. Ethan finished the soup, set the spoon down carefully. You sound like a lawyer. I sound like someone who's had 3 years to prepare arguments for staying alive on her own terms. Lucy collected his bowl, went to refill it. But I'm practical enough to know that looking capable and being invulnerable are different things. That's why when someone knocks instead of threatening, I open the door. Help, real help, is rare enough that turning it away seems foolish. The second bowl appeared in front of him. Ethan stared at it. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. I got nothing to trade. I didn't ask for that either. She sat down again, and this time there was something softer in her expression, though the steel beneath it never wavered. My father used to say that the measure of civilization isn't how you treat your equals. It's how you treat people who can't possibly help you back. You were dying. I had food. The mathematics aren't complicated. Ethan picked up the spoon but didn't eat immediately. He looked at this child who spoke like a philosopher and lived like a survivor and felt something he hadn't experienced in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Shame. Not the hot, angry shame of getting caught in a lie or losing another hand of cards. The deeper kind. The kind that came from seeing yourself clearly through someone else's eyes and realizing how small you'd let yourself become. How'd you end up out here? Lucy asked, settling back in her chair. 4 days without supplies, no horse, no gun. That's not bad luck, that's a series of bad decisions. He should have deflected, should have made up something that sounded better than the truth. But sitting in this cabin full of books and carefully maintained dignity, lying felt like it would break something. I was a trail boss, he said slowly. Good one, too. Led 17 wagon trains through the Rockies without losing more than 2 people to accidents. Had a reputation. Steady work. What happened? Ethan took another bite of stew, using the time to choose his words. Thought I was smarter than I was. Met a man in Cheyenne who made his money at cards seem easy. Real friendly. Bought drinks, told stories, lost just enough hands to keep me interested. He shook his head. By the time I figured out he was working with the dealer, I'd lost 3 months' wages and my good judgment along with it. You chased the loss, Lucy said. Not a question. Kept thinking the next hand would even things out. Borrowed money I couldn't pay back. Missed a contract meeting because I was at the tables. Lost my reputation over the course of 6 weeks. The words came easier now, like lancing a wound. Started taking smaller jobs. Worse pay. Then no jobs at all because word travels and nobody wants a trail boss who might disappear into the first saloon he passes. So you ended up here. Ended up nowhere. Which happened to be here. Ethan gestured vaguely at the window. Was heading for California. Figured I could start over where nobody knew me. Ran out of money in Kansas. Ran out of food in the territories. Horse ran out of life 2 days ago. He met her eyes. And now I'm sitting in a dead town eating charity from a 10-year-old who's got more sense in her little finger than I've managed in 34 years. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable exactly. Lucy seemed to be processing, thinking through everything he'd said with that same careful consideration she'd given everything else. 34 is not that old, she finally said. You could still fix it. Fix what? Whatever you broke when you decided cards were easier than responsibility. The words should have stung. They did sting, but there was no cruelty in how she said it, just observation, clinical, honest. I don't know if I can, Ethan admitted. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Yes. Lucy stood, moved to the small counter where she'd been working earlier. Can't means you've tried everything possible and failed. Won't means you're comfortable enough with failing that you've stopped trying. They look similar, but they're completely different problems. She brought him a piece of bread slathered with some kind of preserve. Won't is harder to fix because it requires you to become uncomfortable again, to care about the outcome more than you care about avoiding the effort. Ethan took the bread. Blackberry preserves, he realized. Probably made them herself. You learned that from one of these books? I learned it from being 10 years old and alone and having to decide every single day whether I was going to maintain my parents' home and dignity or let everything fall apart because it was too hard. She sat back down. I learned it from realizing that being a victim is sometimes easier than being responsible, but it's a lot less useful. He ate the bread slowly, letting the sweetness cut through the exhaustion. Outside, the sun was getting lower, painting the walls with amber light. In another hour, it would be dark. In another hour, he'd need to figure out what came next. The Grayson Ranch is 2 days' walk northeast of here, Lucy said, as if reading his thoughts. They're always looking for hands. Pays fair, food's decent, and they don't ask many questions if you work hard. You telling me to leave? I'm telling you where to go when you do. She stood, went to a trunk in the corner, pulled out a bedroll. You'll stay here tonight, sleep on the floor by the fire. Tomorrow I'll give you enough food for 3 days, directions to the ranch, and a letter of introduction to Thomas Grayson. He knew my father. He'll give you a chance. Why would you do that? Lucy spread the bedroll out near the hearth with practiced efficiency. Because you knocked instead of taking. Because you're honest enough to admit your failures even when you don't have to. And because... She straightened, looked at him with those ancient eyes in that young face. Because my father used to say that people deserve second chances, but they have to be willing to do the work of deserving them. I'm giving you the chance. The work part is up to you. Ethan felt his throat tighten. When was the last time someone had offered him something without wanting something back? When was the last time anyone had looked at him and seen potential instead of just another broken drifter? I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Lucy moved toward a doorway that must have led to her sleeping area. Just don't waste it. There are enough people in the world throwing away chances they haven't earned. Don't be another one. She paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. And Mr. Cole? When you do get yourself sorted out, when you're back on your feet and remembered who you used to be, come back and fix my porch railing. The west side's coming loose, and I'm not tall enough to repair it properly. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Ethan sat alone in the firelight, listening to the small sounds of a child preparing for bed in the next room, and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even hope, really. It was smaller than that and somehow more important. It was the possibility that maybe he hadn't fallen so far that climbing back up was impossible. That maybe one person's belief, even a 10-year-old's, could be enough to make him remember what it felt like to be worth believing in. He finished the last of the bread, set the plate aside, and lowered himself onto the bedroll. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind moved through the empty town like a whisper of all the people who used to be there. But in this cabin, there was warmth. There was kindness. There was a child who'd survived what would have broken most adults, and she'd survived it with her humanity intact. If she could do that, maybe there was still time for him to figure out how to be human again, too. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't dream about cards or debts or all the ways he'd failed. He dreamed about a porch railing that needed fixing, and a promise he hadn't made yet, but already knew he'd keep. Because Lucy Harper hadn't just fed him, she'd given him something to live up to, and God help him, he was going to try. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of dawn that made the high plains look deceptively peaceful. Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, his body protesting every movement as he pushed himself upright. The bedroll had been more comfortable than the ground, but 3 years of poor sleep and worse living had left permanent aches in places he'd forgotten could hurt. Lucy was already dressed and working at the stove, her movements economical and practiced. She glanced over as he struggled to his feet, assessed him with that clinical gaze, and nodded once. You kept the food down. That's progress. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Bacon's almost ready. There's a basin of water on the back porch if you want to wash up first. Ethan accepted the coffee gratefully, the heat of it spreading through his hands like a benediction. You always take care of strangers like this? You're the first stranger in 8 months, so I don't have much of a pattern established. She flipped the bacon with a fork that looked older than she was. Last person who came through was a circuit preacher looking for converts. I told him the whole town was dead and the only thing that needed saving was his breath for the next settlement. He didn't find that amusing. Despite himself, Ethan smiled. The expression felt strange on his face, muscles unused to the movement. He took his coffee to the back porch, found the basin she'd mentioned already filled with clean water. A piece of harsh soap sat beside it, along with a towel that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. He washed his face and hands, watching brown water pool in the basin as days of trail dust dissolved away. His reflection wavered in the surface, gaunt, bearded, eyes that had seen too much failure, but alive. Against all reasonable odds, still alive. When he came back inside, Lucy had plates ready. Bacon, fried eggs, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. More food than he'd seen on one plate in months. "This is too much," he said. "You need the strength for the walk to Grayson's. Sit down and eat before I change my mind about your capacity for common sense." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the scrape of forks on tin and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Outside, a crow called out, harsh and lonely, the sound carrying across the empty town. "Tell me about the ranch," Ethan said finally. "Grayson. He's a fair man?" Lucy chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Fair enough. He's strict but not cruel, expects a full day's work for a full day's pay, and he's got no patience for drinking or gambling on his property. Lost a son to both from what my father told me, so he's firm about those rules." Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Of course there'd be rules about gambling. The universe had a sense of humor after all. "I can live with that," he said quietly. "Can you?" Lucy's gray eyes fixed on him. "Because it's easy to say you'll change when you're desperate and grateful. Harder to follow through when you've got money in your pocket and you pass a saloon that's calling your name." The observation cut deep because it was true. How many times had Ethan promised himself he'd quit? That the last hand was really the last one? That he'd learned his lesson this time, really learned it? "I don't have a good answer for that," he admitted. "All I can tell you is that I'm tired. Tired of losing. Tired of waking up not remembering where I spent the last of my money. Tired of being the man I've become instead of the man I used to be." Being tired isn't the same as being ready to change. "No, but it's a start." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "And it's honest. I could promise you I'm reformed, that one night on your floor fixed everything that's broken in me. But we'd both know I was lying." Lucy nodded slowly, something like approval crossing her young face. "Honesty's better than promises anyway. Promises are easy when the moment's right. Honesty costs something." They finished breakfast, and Lucy began packing supplies into a canvas rucksack that had probably belonged to her father. Ethan watched her work. Dried meat wrapped in cloth, hardtack, a small pouch of cornmeal, another of coffee. She added a battered tin cup and a spoon, then paused before including a small clasp knife. "That knife was my father's," she said, seeing him notice. "I'm lending it, not giving it. I'll expect it back when you return to fix that railing. I'll guard it with my life. I'd rather you use it to prepare food and maintain your equipment, but the sentiment's appreciated." She tied the pack closed with practiced knots. "The trail northeast follows the creek bed for the first day. You'll find water there, though you should boil it before drinking. Second day, the creek bends west. Don't follow it. Keep heading northeast toward those two peaks that look like a camel's humps. You'll see them clearly by midday. The ranch sits in this valley between them." She pulled a piece of paper from a drawer already written in neat, careful script. "This is for Thomas Grayson. It explains who you are and that my father trusted me to make good judgments about character. That's not quite the same as me vouching for you, but it's close enough to get you in the door." Ethan took the letter, unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was remarkably mature, each letter formed with precision. He read through it once, then again, feeling something tighten in his chest. "You wrote that I'm capable of better than my recent choices suggest," he said. "It's true, isn't it?" "How do you know?" Lucy tilted her head, studying him with that unnerving directness. Because people who've given up completely don't knock on doors. They break in or they lie down and die. You knocked, you waited. You were honest about your failures even when you didn't have to be. Those aren't the actions of someone who's completely lost. She moved to the door, opened it to reveal a morning that had brightened into something almost beautiful. They're the actions of someone who's forgotten the way forward but still remembers there used to be one. Ethan shouldered the pack, testing its weight. Substantial, but manageable. Everything he needed to survive the next 2 days, given to him by a child who had every reason to hoard resources and trust no one. "Lucy," he said, then stopped, not quite sure how to put into words what he was feeling. "I know I said it last night, but I don't know how to thank you properly." "Don't thank me. Prove me right." She stepped onto the porch, and he followed. The morning air was sharp with the promise of autumn, clean in a way that made his lungs ache. Most people who come through here, they're running from something. That's fine, I suppose. Running's sometimes necessary, but eventually you have to stop running and start building. That's the harder part. They stood together on that porch, the ghost town stretching out around them like a monument to all the dreams that hadn't survived. But the cabin stood solid. The garden beside it showed signs of careful tending. Lucy's determination had kept this one small piece of the world from falling completely into ruin. "The porch railing," Ethan said suddenly. "The one that needs fixing. Is that the only repair you need?" Lucy's expression shifted, something cautious entering it. "There's a leak in the roof over my parents' room, and the chicken coop needs reinforcement before winter, and the well pump sticks sometimes." She paused. "Why?" "Because I'm coming back," Ethan said, and as the words left his mouth, he felt them settle into something like certainty. "Not just to return your father's knife. I'm coming back because you're 10 years old and you shouldn't be doing all this alone, and because somebody needs to make sure you're safe." "I've been safe for 3 years without help. Safe and lucky aren't the same thing. Lucky runs out." He adjusted the pack on his shoulders. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. Can't promise I won't struggle with old habits. But I can promise that when I get myself sorted at Grayson's, when I've proven I can hold a job and keep my wages in my pocket, I'll come back, and I'll fix everything that needs fixing." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, her gray eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or the likelihood of disappointment. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but I'm holding you to it. I keep a ledger of promises people make." "I'd expect nothing less." Ethan extended his hand. Lucy took it, her grip firm despite her small size. They shook once, solemnly, like business partners sealing a contract. Then he was walking down the porch steps, past the neat garden, onto the road that led out of town. He made himself not look back until he reached the edge of the settlement. When he did, Lucy was still standing there, one hand raised in farewell, looking small and impossibly brave against the backdrop of that dying place. Ethan raised his own hand in return, then turned northeast toward the peaks that would guide him to his second chance. The walk was brutal. His body, even after a night's rest and a good breakfast, wasn't ready for sustained exertion. By midday, every step felt like a negotiation between will and flesh. The pack, light at first, became a burden that dug into his shoulders. The sun, pleasant in the morning, turned merciless as it climbed higher. But he kept moving, kept following the creek bed like Lucy had instructed. When his legs screamed for rest, he thought about that porch railing. When thirst made his head swim despite access to water, he thought about the roof leak. When the voice in his head, the one that had led him into so many saloons and card games, suggested that maybe Grayson's ranch wasn't worth the trouble, that maybe California was still the better option, he thought about Lucy's steady gray eyes and the trust she'd placed in him. Trust he hadn't earned but had been given anyway. By the time he made camp that first night, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely start a fire. But he managed it, managed to prepare a simple meal from the supplies Lucy had packed, managed to clean up properly afterward, the way she would have expected. He fell asleep looking at stars that seemed close enough to touch, and dreamed not of cards, but of carpentry. The second day was worse. His muscles, pushed beyond their limits, protested with every movement. Blisters bloomed on his heels despite the enforced rest. The creek bent west just as Lucy had warned, and he forced himself to leave it behind, striking out across open country toward those distant peaks. By afternoon, he'd begun talking to himself. Small observations, weather commentary, anything to keep his mind occupied and alert. "That cloud looks like a horse," he said out loud, then immediately felt foolish. But foolish was better than defeated, so he kept at it. Described the landscape, named the few plants he recognized, counted his steps in hundreds. The sun was low when he finally crested a rise and saw it. A valley spread between those camel-hump peaks, green with late-season grass. Buildings clustered at the far end, too distant to make out clearly, but unmistakably human, unmistakably purpose. Grayson Ranch. Ethan stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, letting the sight of it fill him with something he'd almost forgotten. Not hope, exactly. Something harder. Determination, maybe. The stubborn refusal to have come this far only to fail at the last mile. He started down into the valley as the sun painted everything gold and amber. By the time he reached the ranch proper, twilight had softened the world's edges, and lamps were being lit in windows. The main house was larger than he'd expected, well-built with a wide porch and solid stone chimney. Corrals stretched behind it, housing horses that nickered softly at his approach. A barn dominated the western edge of the property, its doors open to reveal the warm glow of lantern light. Ethan headed for the barn, figuring that's where he'd find the working men. His assumption proved correct. 3 ranch hands were settling horses for the night, their movements efficient and practiced. They looked up as he approached, curiosity and caution mixing in their expressions. "Help you?" The oldest of the 3 stepped forward, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. "Looking for Thomas Grayson," Ethan said, his voice rough from 2 days of minimal use. "Got a letter of introduction." "That so?" The man's gaze traveled over him, taking in the trail-worn appearance, the borrowed pack, the obvious signs of hard travel. "From who?" "Lucy Harper." The change was immediate. The caution didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. The older man's expression shifted into something like respect. "Little Lucy sent you?" He exchanged glances with the other 2 hands. "How's she getting on?" "She's managing," Ethan said carefully. "More than managing, really. She's surviving with more grace than most adults I've known." "That sounds like Harper's girl, all right." The man gestured toward the main house. "Boss is finishing supper. I'm Clayton, foreman here. You got that letter on you?" Ethan pulled the carefully folded paper from his shirt pocket, handed it over. Clayton unfolded it, angling it toward the lantern light. His lips moved slightly as he read, and Ethan found himself holding his breath. Finally, Clayton refolded the letter, handed it back. "Lucy vouches for you. That carries weight. Thomas trusted Richard Harper's judgment better than most. If his daughter thinks you're worth a chance, we'll hear you out." He paused. "You look like you're about to fall over. When's the last time you ate?" "This morning. Had some jerky at midday." Clayton turned to one of the younger hands. "Ben, get this man some food from the cookhouse. Nothing fancy, just something to keep him upright until the boss can talk to him." To Ethan, "You can wait in the bunkhouse, 3rd building on your left. I'll let Thomas know you're here." "Appreciate it." The food when it came was simple but good. Beef stew, bread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Ethan ate slowly, remembering Lucy's warnings about shocking his system. The bunkhouse was quiet this time of evening, most hands still working or taking their ease elsewhere. He finished eating, cleaned his dishes at the pump outside, and was sitting on the bunkhouse steps when Thomas Grayson finally appeared. The ranch owner was a tall man, maybe 60, with iron gray hair and the kind of posture that spoke of military service or just natural authority. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed but not cruel about it. His eyes, when they fixed on Ethan, were measuring but not immediately hostile. "You're the one with Lucy's letter," Grayson said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. Ethan Cole." He stood, offered his hand. Grayson shook it, his grip firm and brief. "Clayton says Lucy vouches for you. Richard Harper's daughter doesn't give her trust easily, so that means something." Grayson crossed his arms. "But I've learned not to hire men just on letters. Tell me your story. Quick version. I've got paperwork waiting." Ethan had prepared for this on the walk, had rehearsed different versions ranging from defensive to apologetic. But standing in front of this man who clearly valued directness, he chose honesty. I was a trail boss. Good reputation, steady work. Made some bad choices involving gambling and worse company. Lost everything that mattered: job, reputation, self-respect. Ended up half dead in the ghost town where Lucy lives. She fed me, gave me supplies, and sent me here. He met Grayson's gaze steadily. I've got no references except her letter, and no skills except the ones I haven't used in 3 years. But I'm sober, I'm willing to work, and I'm tired of failing. The silence stretched long enough that Ethan's heart started to sink. Then Grayson nodded once, sharp and decisive. Clayton says you used to run wagon trains. That true? 17 successful runs through the Rockies, 2 casualties, both from accidents I couldn't have prevented. Never lost a wagon to poor planning or bad leadership. But you'd gamble away your wages and miss contract meetings? The accuracy of that hurt. Yes, sir. Can't deny it. Won't insult you by trying. Grayson studied him for another long moment. I don't tolerate drinking or gambling on my property. You slip up once, you're done. I don't give third chances. Barely give second ones. But Lucy Harper's got a good head on her shoulders, and her father was one of the best men I knew. He unfolded his arms. You'll start on basic labor. Mucking stalls, mending fences, whatever Clayton assigns. Pays $30 a month plus room and board. You prove yourself over the winter, we'll talk about whether you've got the sense left to be trusted with more responsibility. $30 a month. It was less than half what Ethan used to make as a trail boss, but it was honest wages for honest work, and right now that felt like more than he deserved. I'll take it, he said. And thank you. I know you're taking a risk. I'm taking Lucy's recommendation, Grayson corrected. Don't make her regret it. That child's had enough disappointment in her young life. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. I meant what I said about the gambling. You've got that disease. It doesn't just go away because you want it to. You feel the urge getting strong, you come talk to me. I've walked that path with someone I loved. I know how hard it is. But you walk it honestly, or you don't walk it here. Understood? Understood. Grayson nodded and walked back toward the main house, his boots crunching on gravel. Ethan stood there in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of opportunity settle over him like a physical thing. Heavy, fragile, precious. Clayton appeared a few minutes later, showed him to a bunk in the corner of the shared quarters. Breakfast's at 5, the foreman said. Be ready to work. We don't coddle new hands, and we don't make allowances for soft city habits. I'll be ready. We'll see. Clayton paused at the door. Lucy's letter said you were capable of better than your recent choices suggested. That's not the same as saying you're good. It's saying you might be. A lot of men mistake potential for accomplishment. Don't be one of them. Then he was gone, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a room full of sleeping ranch hands who'd earned their rest through actual labor. Ethan lay down on the thin mattress, feeling every ache and pain from the past 2 days of walking. But underneath the physical exhaustion was something else, something that felt almost like peace. He'd made it. Against odds that should have killed him, through desperation and kindness and his own stubborn refusal to die in the dust, he'd made it to a second chance. Now came the harder part. Now he had to prove he deserved it. The first week at Grayson Ranch nearly broke him all over again. Ethan woke that first morning to darkness and the sound of men moving with purpose around him, pulling on boots and shirts worn soft by years of labor. His body screamed protest as he forced himself upright, every muscle he'd abused on the walk from Lucy's cabin announcing its displeasure in sharp, specific terms. You the new one? A young hand, maybe 19, paused by Ethan's bunk. Clayton wants you in the stables, south side, third stall from the door. Bucket and shovel are where you'd expect them to be. Mucking stalls. Of course. It was the work every new hand started with, the test that separated men willing to earn their place from those who thought they deserved better. Ethan had done it himself 20 years ago, when he'd first hired on with a freight company. His hands had been younger then, his back stronger, his pride less bruised by failure. But he'd done it then. He could do it now. The stable was dark except for a few lanterns hung on posts, their light creating pools of yellow warmth in the cold pre-dawn air. The smell hit him first, hay and horse and manure, earthy and honest. He found the third stall, found the tools, and started working. By the time the sun rose properly, he'd cleaned 4 stalls and his hands were blistered despite the calluses he'd once carried. By midday, when Clayton came to check his progress, Ethan had finished 8 and was starting his 9th, moving with mechanical determination even as his back threatened to give out completely. "You know you can take water breaks," Clayton said, watching him work. "Rather finish the row first." Ethan didn't stop shoveling. "Get a rhythm going, breaks just make it harder to start again," Clayton grunted, something that might have been approval. "Dinner's at noon. Don't miss it. A man works better fed." The cookhouse was full of ranch hands when Ethan arrived, all of them sizing him up with the casual assessment of men who'd seen plenty of new workers come and go. He filled his plate, beef, beans, cornbread, and found a spot at the end of a long table. "Heard you came from Lucy Harper's place," someone said. An older hand, weathered and lean. "That true?" "It is." "How's she managing out there? Been meaning to ride out, check on her, but there's always something needs doing here." Ethan thought about how to answer that, about the clean cabin and the books and the 10-year-old girl who spoke like a philosopher. "She's managing better than she should have to," he said finally. "Place is well kept. She's educated, practical, but she's still just a child living alone in a dead town." "Someone ought to do something about that," another hand said. "Ain't right." "What would you suggest?" Ethan kept his voice neutral. "County wants to ship her to Denver, put her in an orphanage where kids die from neglect. She's safer where she is, long as someone checks on her regular." "That someone being you?" The question came from Ben, the young hand who'd brought him food the night before. Not hostile, just curious. "Eventually, maybe. First I've got to prove I can keep a job longer than a month." Ethan took a bite of cornbread, let the truth of that statement settle. "But yeah, when I'm steady enough to be useful instead of just another problem, I plan to go back. Make sure she's got what she needs." The conversation moved on to other topics. Horses that needed breaking, a fence line that had gone down in the last storm, speculation about whether they'd get snow before November. Ethan listened more than he talked, learning the rhythms of this new place, the personalities that made up its workforce. After dinner, Clayton set him to mending fence posts on the north pasture. Hard work, but it used different muscles than the morning's labor, which was almost a relief. The afternoon stretched long and hot, and by the time the dinner bell rang, Ethan's hands were bleeding through the new blisters. He wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from an old shirt, ate his evening meal in exhausted silence, and was asleep within minutes of lying down. The second day was worse. The third, worse still. His body, pushed past its limits, seemed to exist in a constant state of aching complaint. But he showed up every morning, did the work assigned, kept his head down and his mouth shut except when spoken to. On the 4th day, Clayton moved him to horse work. Basic grooming and feeding, nothing that required real skill, but it was a step up from mucking stalls. Ethan took it as the test it was and focused on doing each task thoroughly, the way he used to approach trail preparations back when his reputation had meant something. On the 7th day, Thomas Grayson himself appeared at the stables while Ethan was brushing down a bay mare. "Clayton says you're a steady worker," Grayson said without preamble. "Says you show up on time, do what you're told, don't complain. Just trying to earn my keep, sir." "That's more than most manage their first week." Grayson leaned against the stall door, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. "Had a man quit yesterday. Said the work was beneath him, that he deserved better than fence mending and stable mucking. You know what I told him?" "No, sir." "Told him dignity isn't in the work, it's in the working. A man who thinks himself too good for honest labor is a man who's forgotten what honest means." Grayson paused. "You strike me as someone who's remembering that lesson the hard way." Ethan kept brushing the mare's flank, the rhythm soothing to both of them. "I forgot a lot of things, sir, trying to remember them one day at a time." "That's the only way it works. One day, one choice, one moment of not giving in to the easy path." Grayson straightened. "Keep at it. You make it through the month without backsliding. We'll talk about increasing your responsibilities." After Grayson left, Ethan stood in the quiet stable, his hands still moving over the mare's coat, and felt something loosen in his chest. Recognition. Not praise exactly, but acknowledgement that he was doing what he'd promised. that the work was being seen and measured and found adequate. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The weeks blurred together into a routine that became almost meditative in its simplicity. Wake before dawn, work until the light failed, eat, sleep, repeat. His hands toughened, his back strengthened, his mind found a kind of peace in the physical exhaustion that left no energy for regret or self-pity. But at night, before sleep claimed him, he thought about Lucy, wondered if she was warm enough as autumn deepened toward winter, if the roof was leaking worse, if anyone had checked on her since he'd left. 6 weeks in, he approached Clayton during the evening meal. "I'd like to request a Sunday off," Ethan said. "Need to ride back to the Harper place, check on Lucy, do some repairs I promised." Clayton studied him over his coffee cup. "That's a 2-day trip round. You'd miss Monday work too." "I know. I'm willing to take it as unpaid time." "That important to you?" "I made her a promise. She kept me alive when I had no right to expect it. Least I can do is keep my word." Clayton was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Talk to Grayson. But if he agrees, you take Monday and Tuesday both. No point riding back exhausted and being useless Wednesday. We can spare you for 2 days if it means that child gets looked after proper." Grayson, when Ethan found him later that evening, listened to the request with his characteristic directness, then agreed immediately. "Take 3 days," he said. "Lucy's been alone too long. Make sure she's set up properly for winter while you're there." He pulled some bills from his pocket, counted out $20. "This is for supplies she might need. Wood, lamp oil, whatever she's short on. Consider it a bonus for not making me regret hiring you." Ethan stared at the money. "Sir, I can't." "You can, and you will. That child saved your life. Least I can do is help you make sure she stays safe through the cold months." Grayson's expression softened slightly. "I knew Richard Harper. Good man. His daughter deserves better than being forgotten just because she's inconvenient to remember." The next morning, Ethan set out before dawn with a borrowed horse, Grayson's $20, his first month's wages in his pocket, and a determination to prove that Lucy's faith hadn't been wasted. The ride took most of the day, following roads that were slowly becoming familiar. He stopped at a general store in a settlement halfway to Lucy's town, used some of Grayson's money to buy lamp oil, a bag of cornmeal, coffee, and several tins of preserved goods that would keep through winter. Added to it, a length of good rope and a box of nails from his own wages. By the time he reached the ghost town, the sun was low and the shadows stretched long across the empty street. But Lucy's cabin glowed with light, smoke rising steady from the chimney, and Ethan felt something in him settle at the sight of it. He tied the horse, gathered the supplies, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and Lucy stood there looking exactly as he remembered. Neat braid, practical dress, those gray eyes that saw everything. For a moment she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then her face broke into a smile so genuine it nearly undid him. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." Ethan held up the supplies. "Brought some things, and I'm ready to fix that porch railing." Lucy stepped back to let him in, and as he crossed the threshold, he realized this was what it felt like to come home. Not to a place, but to a promise kept. To the person who'd believed he was capable of keeping it. They spent the evening catching up over a simple supper Lucy prepared with the easy competence he remembered. She told him about her studies. She was working through a medical text now, finding it challenging but fascinating, about the chickens and the garden, the small routines that structured her days. She asked about the ranch, about the work, about whether he was managing. "It's hard," he admitted. "Some days harder than others. But it's honest, and that makes it easier to wake up for." "You look different," Lucy observed. "Stronger. Less like you're carrying the weight of every mistake at once." "That's because I'm too tired to carry much of anything after a full day's work." But he smiled as he said it. "You were right, though, about having to stop running and start building. The building part is harder, but it feels better." They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easy between them. When Lucy finally declared it was time for sleep, she pointed him to the bedroll by the fire, just as she had before, and Ethan settled in with a contentment he hadn't expected to feel. The next 2 days were a blur of purposeful activity. Ethan fixed the porch railing first, replacing weak boards and reinforcing the structure until it was solid enough to last through years of hard weather. Then he tackled the roof leak, climbing up to patch the damaged section with materials he'd bought in town and some he scavenged from the abandoned buildings. Lucy worked alongside him when she could, holding tools, pointing out other small repairs that needed attention. They reinforced the chicken coop together, strengthened the well pump, replaced a cracked window pane in the main room. The work was satisfying in a way Ethan had almost forgotten work could be. Not labor for wages, but effort invested in protecting someone who mattered. On the third morning, as he was preparing to leave, Lucy handed him back her father's knife. "You kept your promise," she said. "The knife is yours now, if you want it." Ethan looked at the worn handle, the blade that had been sharpened so many times it was half its original width. "I'd be honored," he said quietly, "but only if you're sure." "I'm sure. My father would have liked knowing it went to someone who understood what it meant to rebuild after falling apart." They stood together on the porch, the newly repaired solid porch, and Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle over him in a way that was nothing like a burden. "I'll come back in a month," he said, "before the deep cold sets in. Make sure you're stocked for winter." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." He met her steady gaze. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Least I can do is make sure you're not alone out here." Lucy nodded, something soft entering her expression. "All right, but bring yourself too, not just supplies. I missed the conversation." "So do I," Ethan admitted. And it was true. In Lucy's company, he felt like the man he used to be, the one who'd been worth something before he'd gambled it all away. She reminded him not through judgment, but through expectation, the simple belief that he was capable of being better. The ride back to Grayson's felt different than the ride out had. He was returning to work, yes, but also to something that was starting to feel like purpose. The ranch gave him structure and wages, and the dignity of honest labor. Lucy gave him something harder to name, accountability maybe, or the kind of family you chose rather than inherited. When he arrived back at the ranch on Tuesday evening, Clayton met him at the stable. "How's the Harper girl?" the foreman asked. "She's managing. Still too independent for her own good, but her place is secure for winter now." Ethan dismounted, started unsaddling his horse. "I'll be going back regular to check on her. Monthly, if that can be arranged. I'll talk to Grayson, but I expect he'll allow it. He's got a soft spot for that child, even if he doesn't show it obvious." Clayton paused. "You done good work since you got here, Cole. Steady, reliable. That's worth noting." Praise from Clayton was rare enough that Ethan felt it settle warm in his chest. "Trying to be worth the chance I was given." "So far you are. Keep at it." The months that followed fell into a pattern that felt less like routine and more like the building blocks of an actual life. Ethan worked hard at the ranch, taking on increased responsibilities as Grayson's trust in him grew. By December, he was leading work crews, organizing fence repairs and winter preparations, using skills he'd thought he'd lost forever. And once a month, without fail, he rode to Lucy's cabin, brought supplies, made repairs, spent precious hours in conversation with a child who was becoming something more than just the person who'd saved him. She was becoming family in the truest sense, chosen, earned, built through consistent care rather than blood obligation. On his fourth visit, in the bitter cold of January, Lucy met him at the door with an unusual expression, part excitement, part uncertainty. "I need to show you something," she said, leading him to the table where several books lay open. "I've been reading about legal guardianship, specifically about how it works when there's no formal adoption, but there's consistent care and financial support." Ethan felt his heart start to pound. "Lucy, let me finish." She looked up at him with those steady gray eyes. "The county hasn't bothered me in over a year, but that doesn't mean they won't come back. And if they do, having someone who can legally claim responsibility for me would make their arguments much weaker. You're asking if I'd be your guardian. I'm saying that what we're already doing, you checking on me, making repairs, bringing supplies, me being here when you need reminding of why you're working so hard, that's already what family does. The paperwork would just make it official." She paused. "And harder for anyone to separate us." Ethan sank into a chair, his mind racing. Guardian, legal responsibility. The weight of it was enormous, and yet it felt right in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "I'm not perfect," he said slowly. "I'm still working on staying away from old habits, still proving I can be reliable long term. I know. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for consistent, for someone who shows up and keeps promises and doesn't leave just because things get difficult." Lucy sat across from him. "You've been doing that for 5 months now. That's more than most adults manage." "Your father's knife," Ethan said suddenly. "When you gave it to me, you said he'd want it to go to someone who understood rebuilding. Did you know then that you were going to ask me this?" "I knew I was investing in the possibility." A small smile crossed her face. "You're not the only one who can make plans, Mr. Cole." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Ethan found himself smiling back. "No, I suppose you're not." He looked at the book spread across the table, at the research this 10-year-old had done into securing her own future. "All right. Yes, I'll do it. I'll be your guardian, legal and otherwise. But you need to understand what that means. It means you're responsible for me until I'm of age. It means you have legal standing to make decisions about my welfare. It means your family," Ethan interrupted gently. "Real family. The kind that doesn't disappear when things get hard. The kind that shows up and keeps showing up no matter what." He reached across the table and Lucy took his hand. "It means I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret knocking on your own door when a broken stranger came looking for help." Lucy's eyes were bright, though no tears fell. "I won't regret it. I never have." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, while outside the winter wind howled through the ghost town and the lamp burned steady in the window. When Ethan returned to Grayson's 2 days later, he carried more than just supplies and tools. He carried papers that needed filing, plans that needed making, and a sense of purpose that felt permanent in a way nothing had felt in years. He found Thomas Grayson in the ranch office, going over accounts by lamplight. "Sir, could I have a moment?" Ethan asked from the doorway. "Come in, Cole. What's on your mind?" Ethan stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "I need to talk to you about Lucy Harper, about becoming her legal guardian." Grayson set down his pen, leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious commitment." "I know, but I've been making it unofficially for months now. This just makes it legal. Protects her if the county tries to interfere again." "And protects you how?" Grayson's eyes were sharp. "Because taking on guardianship of a child, that's going to change things. Your time, your wages, your responsibilities." "It already has changed things," Ethan said quietly. "She's the reason I'm still here. Still sober, still working toward being someone worth respecting. Making it official doesn't change what's already true. She's family, and family takes care of each other." Grayson nodded slowly, something like approval crossing his weathered face. Richard would be pleased, I think, knowing his daughter found someone decent. He pulled out a clean sheet of paper. "You'll need a character reference for the court. I'll write one. And you'll need to prove you can support her financially. Your wages here, plus any plans you have for improvement." "I was hoping to ask about that too," Ethan said. "Whether there might be room for advancement. Not immediately, but as I continue proving myself." "There might be." Grayson picked up his pen again. "We'll talk specifics after you've got the guardianship settled. But Cole, you keep working the way you have been, showing up every day with your head clear and your word good. There's a future here. For both of you." Walking back to the bunkhouse that night, Ethan looked up at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and thought about how far he'd fallen and how far he'd climbed back. From a man dying in the dust to someone a child trusted enough to call family. From broken and desperate to steady and purposeful. It wasn't redemption yet. He knew better than to think 6 months of good choices erased years of bad ones. But it was progress. Real, measurable progress. The kind you could build on. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cole believed he was worth building on. The courthouse in Denver smelled like old paper and bureaucratic indifference. Ethan sat on a hard wooden bench outside the magistrate's office, his best shirt pressed and clean, his hands folded carefully in his lap to hide the nervous tremor that had started that morning and refused to quit. Beside him, Lucy sat with her customary composure, though her fingers worried at the edge of her sleeve in a gesture so small he might have missed it if he hadn't been looking. "You don't have to be nervous," she said quietly. "The paperwork is in order. Mr. Grayson's letter is very thorough. We've met all the requirements." "Requirements on paper don't always match what happens in practice," Ethan replied. "Magistrates have discretion. They can decide I'm not suitable regardless of what the documents say." "Then they'd be wrong." Lucy's chin lifted slightly, that stubborn steel he'd come to recognize entering her posture. "You've been consistent for 8 months. You've maintained employment, demonstrated financial stability, and shown genuine care for my well-being. If they can't see that, the failure is theirs, not yours." Before Ethan could respond, the office door opened and a clerk gestured them inside. The magistrate was a thin man in his 50s with spectacles that caught the light and a mouth that seemed permanently set in skepticism. He looked at the papers spread before him, then at Ethan, then at Lucy, his expression giving nothing away. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice dry as old leaves, "you're petitioning for guardianship of Miss Harper here. That's an unusual request given your lack of family connection." "Yes, sir, but not unusual given the circumstances. Lucy's been living alone for nearly 4 years. I've been providing regular support and care for the past 8 months." "So your letter from Mr. Grayson indicates." The magistrate tapped the document. "He speaks highly of your character, though he notes you came to his employment in what he describes as reduced circumstances. Would you care to elaborate on that?" Ethan had known this question would come, had rehearsed the answer until it was smooth enough to sound honest without being self-pitying. "I made poor choices that cost me my career and reputation, sir. Gambling, primarily. I hit bottom, and Lucy Harper gave me a chance to climb back up. Everything I've rebuilt since then has been in service of being worthy of that chance." "And you believe you're now worthy of legal responsibility for a child?" "I believe I'm committed to her welfare regardless of what this court decides. The guardianship just makes official what's already true. We're family. She kept me alive when I had no reason to expect help. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets that kindness." The magistrate turned his attention to Lucy. "Miss Harper, you're quite young to be making such a consequential decision. Do you understand what guardianship means? Mr. Cole would have legal authority over your education, your finances, your residence." "I understand perfectly, sir." Lucy's voice was clear and steady. "I've read the relevant statutes, including the Colorado Territory provisions for orphaned minors and the conditions under which guardianship can be contested or revoked. I'm aware of my rights and Mr. Cole's responsibilities under the arrangement." The magistrate's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've read the statutes." "I've read many things, sir. My parents believed in thorough education. I wouldn't enter into this arrangement if I didn't understand it completely." "And you want this? You're not being coerced or pressured?" "I initiated it," Lucy said firmly. "Mr. Cole has been honorable and consistent in his care. He's proven himself trustworthy over months of regular visits and support. I would rather have a guardian who has demonstrated actual commitment than be remanded to county care where children are treated as administrative problems rather than individuals." For the first time, something like amusement flickered across the magistrate's face. "You make a compelling argument, Miss Harper." He looked back at the papers, made a few notes in careful script. "Mr. Cole, there are conditions. You'll be required to submit quarterly reports on Miss Harper's welfare to this court. Any change in your employment or residence must be reported within 30 days. And if you fail to meet the standards of care expected, the county retains the right to review this arrangement." "I understand, sir." "Furthermore, given your admitted history with gambling, I'm including a specific provision. Any evidence of such behavior will be grounds for immediate revocation of guardianship. Miss Harper deserves stability. Can you provide that?" Ethan met the magistrate's gaze directly. "I haven't placed a bet since the day I knocked on Lucy's door. I won't place one while I'm responsible for her future. You have my word on that." The magistrate studied him for a long moment, then picked up his pen and signed the papers with decisive strokes. "Then guardianship is granted. Congratulations, Mr. Cole. You're now legally responsible for another human being's welfare. I suggest you take that seriously." "I do, sir. More than anything." Outside the courthouse, standing on the steps with the spring sun warm on his face and legal papers in his hand, Ethan felt something shift permanently in his understanding of himself. He was Lucy's guardian now, not just the man who checked on her monthly or brought supplies or fixed her porch, her actual, legal, responsible family. Lucy slipped her hand into his, a rare gesture of open affection. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up, for coming back, for being the person I believed you could be." "I should be thanking you," Ethan replied, his voice rough. "You saved my life that day. Everything since then has just been me trying to deserve it." "You do deserve it. You just had to remember how." She squeezed his hand once, then let go, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Now we should get back. We have a long ride, and I want to be home before dark." Home. The word settled warm and permanent in Ethan's chest. Not the bunkhouse at Grayson's, comfortable as that had become. Home was Lucy's cabin in the ghost town, the place where everything had changed, where a dying man had knocked on a door and found salvation in the form of a 10-year-old girl who refused to let him waste his second chance. The ride back took 2 days, and they used the time to discuss practical matters. Lucy's education would continue as it had. She was far ahead of most children her age already, but Ethan wanted to make sure she had access to more advanced materials as she needed them. They talked about the cabin, about whether it made sense to stay in the ghost town long term or consider relocating closer to Grayson's ranch. "I don't want to leave," Lucy said as they made camp the first night. "That cabin is the last connection I have to my parents. Their books are there, their things, the garden my mother planted." "Then we stay," Ethan said simply. "I'll keep working at Grayson's, keep coming back regular. When you're older, if you want to go elsewhere for school or training, we'll figure that out. But right now, if that's home for you, that's where home is." Lucy looked at him across the campfire, gratitude and relief mixing in her expression. "You mean that? You're not just saying it to make me feel better." "I mean it. Family means respecting what matters to each other. That cabin matters to you, so it matters to me." They reached the ghost town by late afternoon the second day. The familiar shape of Lucy's cabin came into view, and Ethan felt that same sense of rightness he always did approaching this place. It should have felt strange, this dying settlement where only one building still showed signs of life, where his own near-death had brought him to Lucy's door. But instead it felt like proof that good things could grow even in the hardest soil, if someone was willing to tend them carefully enough. Over the following months, they settled into a new rhythm. Ethan continued working at Grayson's, but now he had legal standing to bring Lucy with him when weather or circumstances required it. The ranch hands took to her immediately, charmed by her sharp mind and unflappable demeanor. Clayton took particular interest in teaching her about horses, and she absorbed the knowledge with the same systematic thoroughness she applied to everything else. Thomas Grayson watched the arrangement with what Ethan had learned to recognize as approval, though the rancher rarely said so directly. But in June, after Ethan had been working there nearly a year, Grayson called him into the office. "Sit down, Cole. We need to discuss your future here." Ethan sat, keeping his expression neutral despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. Discussions about futures could go either direction. "You've been reliable," Grayson continued. "More than reliable. You've shown leadership, good judgment, and you've earned the respect of the other hands. Clayton's getting older, thinking about reducing his responsibilities. I need someone who can eventually step into a foreman role." "Sir, Ethan stopped, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. "I'm offering you a position as assistant foreman, $50 a month, your own cabin on the property if you want it. Though I understand if you prefer staying with Lucy in town, you'd help Clayton manage the work crews, oversee larger projects, handle some of the contract negotiations with buyers." Grayson leaned back in his chair. "It's a significant increase in responsibility, also a significant increase in what you'd earn." $50 a month. Ethan had made that much as a trail boss, back when he'd been at the top of his profession. To be offered it again after everything he'd lost and clawed back felt almost surreal. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say yes or no. I don't need flowery speeches, just a decision." "Yes." The word came out more forcefully than Ethan intended. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored and grateful. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You'll earn every dollar of that 50, believe me. Clayton works hard, and he'll expect the same from anyone assisting him. Grayson pulled out a bottle and 2 glasses from his desk drawer, poured them each a measure of whiskey. But first, a drink to new beginnings. You've come a long way from the man who showed up here with nothing but Lucy's letter and desperation. Ethan looked at the glass, at the amber liquid that had once been part of his downfall. For a moment, old hunger stirred, not overwhelming, but present. A reminder that recovery was ongoing, not finished. "I appreciate it, sir," he said carefully, "but I don't drink anymore. Made that choice, and I'm keeping it." Grayson studied him for a moment, then nodded with what looked like respect. He poured Ethan's whiskey back into the bottle and refilled the glass with water from a pitcher on his desk. "Then we'll toast with this, to second chances and the men wise enough to take them seriously." They clinked glasses, and Ethan drank water that tasted like the best whiskey he'd never have again. That evening, he rode to Lucy's cabin to tell her the news. She was in the garden when he arrived, tending vegetables that had grown thick and productive under her careful management. She looked up as he dismounted, reading something in his expression that made her set down her tools and walk over. "Something happened," she said. "Grayson promoted me. Assistant foreman, 50 a month." For a moment, Lucy just stared at him. Then her face split into a grin so wide and genuine, it transformed her usual serious expression into something that looked exactly like what she was, a child experiencing pure, uncomplicated joy. "Ethan, that's wonderful!" She actually jumped slightly, a rare display of uncontrolled enthusiasm. "That means everything's working. You're not just surviving, you're succeeding." "Couldn't have done it without you," he said, and meant it completely. "You gave me the reason to try. Every time I wanted to quit, wanted to walk into a saloon and forget how hard climbing back up is, I thought about you, about that first morning when you looked at me and saw someone worth saving." Lucy's expression softened. "I saw someone who wanted to be saved. That's different. Lots of people are worth it. Not all of them want it badly enough to do the work." She paused. "You did the work, Ethan. I just pointed you toward the door." They went inside, and Lucy prepared supper while Ethan told her about the new position, what it would mean, how it would change their routine. He'd have less time for extended visits, but more resources to ensure she had everything she needed. Could hire someone to check on her between his visits, maybe. Could afford better supplies, more books, whatever she required for her education. "I don't need someone checking on me between your visits," Lucy said firmly. "I need you to succeed at this new position. That's more important than constant supervision." "You're 11 years old, Lucy. You shouldn't be alone so much." "I'm nearly 12, and I've been managing fine." She set a plate in front of him with enough force to emphasize her point. "I appreciate your concern. I do. But treating me like I'm helpless doesn't honor the person I've had to become. I survived 3 years before you arrived. I can handle a few weeks between visits now that I know you're coming back." Ethan recognized the independence in her tone, the pride that came from hard-won self-sufficiency. He'd seen that same pride in himself once, before he'd gambled it away along with everything else. "All right," he said, "but you promise me, anything happens, anything you need, you get word to the ranch immediately. Clayton or one of the hands will come get me." "I promise." Lucy sat down across from him. "Now tell me everything about the new position. What will you be doing? What kind of authority will you have? Will Clayton teach you the contract negotiations?" They talked late into the evening, planning and speculating and imagining a future that no longer seemed impossibly distant. Ethan would build his career back, piece by piece. Lucy would continue her education, eventually perhaps attend a real school in Denver or another city. They'd maintain the cabin as home base, but the world was opening up again for both of them. The next 2 years passed in a blur of steady progress. Ethan proved himself as assistant foreman, managing work crews with the same competence he'd once brought to wagon trains. His judgment was sound, his leadership fair, and the men respected him because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When a late-season storm damaged the north fence line, Ethan worked alongside the crew for 3 straight days in freezing rain to get it repaired. When a young hand made a dangerous mistake with a spooked horse, Ethan disciplined him firmly, but also took time to teach him proper technique, turning the error into education. Clayton, watching all this, began talking openly about retirement. Not immediately, but soon. And when he did, everyone understood that Ethan Cole would step into the foreman position without question. Lucy, meanwhile, had grown from a child into something approaching young adulthood. At 13, she stood taller, her face losing its childish roundness while gaining definition and character. She'd worked through most of the advanced texts her father had left, and Ethan had supplemented them with mathematics books, scientific journals, even some medical texts from a doctor in Denver who'd heard about the brilliant girl teaching herself from books in a ghost town. She'd also begun teaching. 3 families had moved into the area near Grayson's ranch, homesteaders trying to make a life from hard land. Their children needed education, and Lucy had volunteered to provide it. Twice a week, 5 children ranging from 6 to 14 would gather in a barn Clayton had cleared out for the purpose, and Lucy would teach them reading, mathematics, history, basic sciences. She was a natural teacher, patient but exacting, able to explain complex concepts in ways that made sense to young minds. Ethan watched her with pride that sometimes felt almost painful in its intensity. This was what he'd helped protect, not just a life, but a future. Lucy wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, building something meaningful from the ashes of loss. But not everything had been smooth. There had been moments when old demons circled close, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing, when Ethan passed a saloon and felt that old pull like a physical ache. Twice he'd nearly given in, standing outside the doors of gambling halls, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with want. Both times he'd thought about Lucy, about the trust in her gray eyes, about the life they were building together, the family they'd become. And both times he'd turned around and walked away, the victory feeling harder won than any hand of cards he'd ever taken. He told Lucy about those moments later, feeling she deserved honesty about his ongoing struggles. She'd listened without judgment, then said something that had stayed with him since. Strength isn't never feeling temptation. It's feeling it and choosing differently anyway. Every time you walk away, you're proving you're stronger than the thing that almost destroyed you. Now, in the spring of his 3rd year at Grayson's, Ethan stood in the ranch office across from Thomas Grayson, discussing something that would change everything again. "Clayton's officially retiring end of summer," Grayson said, "which means the foreman position is yours if you want it. $75 a month, full authority over ranch operations under my oversight, percentage of profits from successful cattle sales." $75 a month. More than Ethan had ever made, even at his peak. Enough to secure Lucy's future completely, to send her to any school she wanted, to build something lasting. "There's a condition," Grayson continued. "The foreman lives on the property, full-time. It's necessary for managing early morning operations and emergency situations." He paused. "I know that complicates things with Lucy." Ethan had known this was coming, had thought about it extensively. "She's nearly 14, old enough to stay at her cabin during the week if I'm here on the property. I could ride out weekends, make sure she's set. And she's been talking about attending the academy in Denver eventually. This might be good timing for that transition." "Or," Grayson said slowly, "there's another option. The old foreman's cabin is good-sized. 2 bedrooms, real kitchen, much more space than your current quarters. Lucy could live there with you, continue her teaching at the ranch, be close by. That ghost town's no place for a young woman growing up, Cole. You know that as well as I do." The suggestion landed with unexpected force. Move Lucy permanently to the ranch. Make this place, not the ghost town, their official home. It made practical sense, but it meant asking Lucy to leave the last physical connection to her parents. "I'd need to talk to her," Ethan said. "Of course, but think about it seriously. She's at an age where she needs more than just periodic check-ins. She needs stability, community, opportunity. The ranch can provide all that, and you'd be here to make sure she's safe and supported." That evening, Ethan rode to Lucy's cabin with a head full of competing thoughts. He found her in the garden as usual, this time training bean vines up a trellis she'd constructed from salvaged wood. She looked up as he approached, immediately reading his expression. "Another promotion?" she guessed. "Foreman. Clayton's retiring. $75 a month plus profit percentage." He dismounted, tied his horse. "But the position requires living on the property full-time." Lucy stood, brushing dirt from her hands. which means we need to make a decision about where I live. Grayson suggested you move to the ranch permanently. The foreman's cabin has space for both of us. You could continue teaching, be part of the ranch community. It makes practical sense. But, Lucy prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, but this cabin is your home, your parents' home. I won't make you leave it if that's not what you want. They walked together toward the porch, sat on the railing Ethan had repaired that first time he'd come back. The ghost town stretched around them, empty and eternal, a monument to impermanence. I've been thinking about this for a while, Lucy said slowly, about what staying here means versus what leaving means. This cabin holds my parents' memory, yes, but they're not here. Haven't been for 6 years now. And I've learned something important. Memory doesn't live in places. It lives in what we carry forward. She looked at the garden, the neat rows of vegetables, the careful maintenance that had kept this one building standing while everything around it fell. My mother taught me to grow things. My father taught me to think critically and value education. Those lessons don't disappear if I leave this building. I carry them with me. Use them wherever I am. So you want to move to the ranch? I want us to build a life together somewhere that has a future, not just a past. Lucy met his eyes. This town is dead, Ethan. It was dying when my parents lived here, and their deaths just finished what disease started. Staying here is me clinging to ghosts. Moving forward is me honoring what they actually wanted. For me to live fully, to be part of a community, to use my education to help others. Ethan felt relief and sadness mixing in his chest. Relief that Lucy understood, that she was ready to move forward. Sadness for what would be left behind. Not just a cabin, but the place where everything had changed, where a dying man had found salvation. We'll take what matters most, he said. Your parents' books, your mother's quilt, anything that carries real meaning. The building stays, but the memory comes with us. When would we move? Lucy asked. End of summer when Clayton officially retires and I take over as foreman. Lucy nodded, already processing, already planning. That gives me time to prepare my students for the transition and to say goodbye properly to this place. She stood, offering him her hand. Come inside. Let's start deciding what we take and what we leave. They spent the evening going through the cabin room by room, sorting memory from mere possession. Her father's books would come, along with his knife that Ethan still carried. Her mother's quilt, her sewing basket, a set of dishes painted with delicate flowers. Practical items that were still useful, pots, tools, lanterns. Everything else would stay, mute witnesses to the life that had been lived here. As they worked, Ethan felt the weight of transition settling over them. Another ending, another beginning. The pattern that had defined the past 3 years continued. Loss transformed into growth, pain into purpose, failure into family. Are you scared? Lucy asked as they finished packing her mother's sewing supplies. About being foreman? It's a lot of responsibility. Terrified, Ethan admitted. Not about the work itself, I can do that, but about failing again, about proving everyone wrong who believed I could be trusted. You won't fail, Lucy said with certainty, because you remember what failure costs. That makes you careful in ways people who've never fallen can't understand. She folded the quilt carefully, her hands gentle on the fabric. Besides, you're not doing this alone. We're family. Your success is my success. Your failures, if they come, we face together. Family. The word still struck Ethan with its power, even after 3 years of living it. He'd gained and lost families before, parents dead, siblings scattered, relationships destroyed by his own poor choices. But this family, the one he'd built with Lucy through consistent care and mutual respect, felt different, permanent in a way that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Then together it is, he said. Foreman of Grayson Ranch with the world's most educated teenage daughter to keep him honest. Guardian and ward, Lucy corrected, but she was smiling. Building something better than either of us could manage alone. Outside, darkness had settled completely over the ghost town, but inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warm and steady, illuminating 2 people, a man rebuilding from failure and a girl refusing to be broken by loss, as they packed away one chapter of their lives and prepared to write the next. The move happened on a Saturday in late August, when the air hung thick with the last heat of summer and the first hints of autumn whispered in the evening breeze. Ethan hitched a wagon at dawn and made the familiar ride to the ghost town one final time as residents rather than visitors. Lucy was waiting on the porch, surrounded by crates and bundles that represented everything they'd decided to keep. Books wrapped carefully in oilcloth, kitchen goods packed in straw, her mother's quilt folded into a trunk that had survived the cholera epidemic and now would survive this transition too. "I said goodbye to the garden this morning," Lucy said as Ethan began loading the wagon. Her voice was steady, but he caught the faint tremor beneath it. "Told the chickens they'd be fine with the Hendersons taking them over. It felt foolish talking to chickens." "Nothing foolish about it," Ethan replied, securing a crate of medical texts. "Places deserve proper farewells same as people do." They worked in companionable silence, carrying out 3 years of careful accumulation. With each load, the cabin grew emptier, more ghostly itself, joining the hollow buildings that surrounded it. When only the heavy furniture remained, things they'd leave for whoever might eventually need them, Lucy stood in the doorway looking back at rooms that had held her entire childhood. "My mother used to sit right there," she said, pointing to the chair by the window. "She'd mend clothes and watch the street, always hoping more families would arrive. She never gave up believing this town could survive." Lucy's hand rested on the door frame. "She was wrong, but I admired that she never stopped hoping." Ethan came to stand beside her. "Your parents built something here that mattered. It didn't last the way they planned, but it mattered. You're proof of that." "Am I?" Lucy looked up at him. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dishonoring them by leaving." "You're honoring them by living, by taking what they taught you and building something new with it." He put his hand on her shoulder. "They gave you roots, Lucy. Now you're giving yourself wings. That's exactly what good parents want." She nodded slowly, then stepped back and pulled the door closed. Didn't lock it. There was nothing left inside worth stealing, and maybe someone would need shelter someday. Maybe the ghost town would surprise everyone and find life again. But even if it didn't, Lucy Harper would carry its lessons forward into whatever came next. The ride to Grayson Ranch took most of the day. Lucy spent it turned backward in the wagon seat, watching her cabin grow smaller and smaller until distance and dust swallowed it completely. Then she turned forward, set her jaw in that determined way Ethan had learned meant she was making peace with hard choices, and started talking about practical matters. Where her books would fit in the new cabin, whether there was good light for reading, how she'd organize the teaching schedule now that she'd be on site full-time. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the sun hung low and golden, painting everything in shades that made even ordinary buildings look significant. The foreman's cabin sat slightly apart from the main cluster of structures, positioned to oversee the corrals and barn while maintaining some privacy. It was larger than Ethan had remembered from his brief inspection weeks earlier, solid log construction, a porch that wrapped 2 sides, windows that would catch morning light. Clayton met them as Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. The old foreman moved slower these days, his retirement driven as much by necessity as choice, but his eyes were sharp as ever as he assessed the loaded wagon. "That everything?" he asked. "Everything that matters," Ethan replied. "Good. Light travelers make better settlers." Clayton nodded to Lucy. "Got your room set up already? Nothing fancy, but the bed's solid and there's a desk by the window. Figured you'd need that for your studying." Lucy's face brightened. "You set up a room for me?" "Well, I wasn't going to make you sleep on the floor. Come on, I'll show you." Ethan watched them head inside, Clayton's gruff voice explaining the cabin's quirks and features, Lucy responding with questions that showed she was already thinking about how to make this space functional. Then he began unloading the wagon, carrying boxes and crates into what would be their home for however long the future stretched. The cabin's interior exceeded expectations. The main room held a good-sized kitchen area, a table that could seat 6, and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through Colorado winters. 2 bedrooms branched off the main space, one larger for Ethan, one smaller but well-lit for Lucy. The previous foreman had maintained it carefully, and Clayton had clearly spent time preparing it for new occupants. Fresh whitewash on the walls, floors swept clean, curtains that looked new hanging in the windows. "Place cleans up nice when you put effort into it," Clayton said, catching Ethan's appreciative look. Figured you'd have enough to manage without starting from neglect. I appreciate it. More than I can say. Don't need saying, just do the job right. Clayton moved toward the door, then paused. You've come a long way, Cole. From the man who showed up here 3 years ago looking half dead and desperate. I wasn't sure you'd make it past the first month, if I'm being honest. But you proved me wrong. And I'm glad of it. This ranch needs someone who understands what it costs to rebuild. After Clayton left, Ethan and Lucy spent the evening unpacking and arranging, transforming empty spaces into something that felt lived in. Her books filled shelves Clayton had built into her room's walls. Her mother's quilt went on her bed, a splash of color against plain wool blankets. Kitchen goods found homes in cupboards, and slowly the cabin stopped being a structure and became a home. That night, sitting at their new table eating a simple supper Lucy had prepared, Ethan felt something settle deep in his chest. This was real, permanent. A life built through consistent choices and mutual care, now taking physical form in walls and rooms and the comfortable silence of family sharing a meal. Tomorrow I start as foreman, he said, and you start teaching here full time. Both of us beginning something new. Both of us continuing something we started 3 years ago, Lucy corrected. This is just the next part. The next morning arrived cold and clear, autumn announcing itself with frost that turned the world silver before the sun burned it away. Ethan woke to Lucy already up and moving in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and frying bacon pulling him from sleep more effectively than any alarm. He dressed quickly, aware that every ranch hand would be watching to see how the new foreman carried himself on his first official day. He needn't have worried. The transition was smooth because Clayton had prepared for it, and because Ethan had spent 3 years earning the respect of the men he'd now be leading. He assigned work crews with quiet authority, helped where help was needed, and made decisions with the same careful judgment that had rebuilt his reputation one choice at a time. By midday, when he took a break to check on Lucy, he found her in the converted barn with 7 children of varying ages gathered around her makeshift teaching area. She stood at a chalkboard salvaged from Denver, explaining mathematics with patient clarity while her students worked through problems on slates. She looked older than her 14 years standing there, looked like what she was becoming, someone who would leave a mark on the world through knowledge and dedication. She glanced up as he appeared in the doorway, gave him a small nod that said everything was fine here, then returned to her teaching. Ethan watched for another moment, pride and gratitude mixing until he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began, then headed back to his own responsibilities. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Ethan managed ranch operations with growing confidence, his past experience as a trail boss providing unexpected advantages in logistics and planning. He could read weather, anticipate problems, and make quick decisions when emergencies arose. When a fence line collapsed in a storm, he had crews organized and working before dawn. When a buyer tried to lowball them on cattle prices, Ethan negotiated firmly but fairly, securing terms that satisfied everyone. Thomas Grayson watched all this with approval that he occasionally voiced in brief, gruff compliments. "You're earning that $75 a month," he said one evening as they reviewed contracts. "Ranch is running smoother than it has in years." Lucy, meanwhile, had transformed the barn into a proper schoolroom. She'd requisitioned supplies from her first month's teaching wages. Grayson paid her $30 monthly, recognizing the value of education for ranch families, and created an environment that was part classroom, part laboratory, part library. Students didn't just memorize facts. They learned to think, to question, to understand rather than simply regurgitate. Word spread. By October, 2 more families had enrolled their children. By November, Lucy was teaching 11 students ranging from 6 to 16, and some of the older ranch hands had started attending evening sessions where she taught reading to grown men who'd never had the opportunity to learn. One of those men was Garrett Walsh, a hand in his 40s who'd spent his whole life working ranches from Texas to Montana. He'd approach the barn after supper, hat in his weathered hands, embarrassment and determination warring in his expression. "Miss Lucy," he'd say, "if you got time, I'd like to learn my letters proper. Never had the chance as a boy, and I'm tired of making my mark when other men can sign their names." Lucy never showed anything but respect for his courage. "Of course, Mr. Walsh, learning has no age limit. Let's start with the alphabet." Ethan watched these interactions with wonder. His daughter. And she was his daughter now in every way that mattered. Legal papers just confirming what the heart already knew, was changing lives through simple dedication to helping others learn. She'd taken the education her parents had given her and multiplied it, spreading knowledge like seeds that would grow long after she was gone. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ethan and Lucy settled into rhythms that felt permanent and good. Morning coffee together before their respective work began. Evening meals where they discussed their days, Ethan's decisions about cattle rotation or fence repair, Lucy's breakthroughs with struggling students or frustrations with limited resources. Weekend afternoons reading in comfortable silence, each lost in their own books but aware of the other's presence. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late November that Lucy looked up from the medical text she'd been studying and said, "I've been thinking about the future, about what comes after teaching." Ethan set down his own book, a ranch management manual he'd been working through. "You mean college? Medical school?" "Maybe. There's a women's medical college in Philadelphia, another in Boston. I could apply when I'm 16, be admitted at 17. She paused. "But that's expensive, and far from here." "We'll figure it out," Ethan said immediately. "I've been saving most of my wages. And if you want to be a doctor, Lucy, nothing should stop that. Your mother would have wanted—" "My mother would have wanted me to be practical about opportunities," Lucy interrupted gently. "Going east for school means leaving you here alone, means being separated for years. I'm not sure that's what either of us wants." Ethan felt his throat tighten. The thought of Lucy leaving, even for good reasons, created an ache he wasn't prepared for. But he'd learned over the past 3 years that love meant wanting what was best for someone, even when it was hard. "What I want is for you to have every opportunity to become whoever you're meant to be," he said carefully. "If that means medical school in Philadelphia, we'll find a way. If it means something else, we'll find that way instead. But I won't be the reason you limit yourself." Lucy closed her book, came to sit beside him on the worn sofa they'd moved from the ghost town cabin. "You're not limiting me. You're the reason I have options at all. 3 years ago, I was a child alone in a dying town with no future except survival. Now I'm teaching, learning, growing. That's because you knocked on my door and then kept every promise you made after." "You're the one who opened it," Ethan reminded her. "You could have turned away a desperate stranger, could have been cautious and careful like anyone sensible would have been. But you saw something worth saving." "I saw someone who wanted to be saved," Lucy replied. "That's different. Lots of people are worth saving. Not all of them want it badly enough." She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of affection she rarely allowed herself. "We saved each other, I think. You gave me family again. I gave you a reason to rebuild. That's not limitation. That's foundation." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly, the evening sounds of the ranch settling for night filtering through the windows. Finally, Lucy spoke again. "I think I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not forever, but for now. Keep teaching, keep learning. Maybe study under the doctor in town, learn practical medicine instead of just theory. Then, when I'm ready, decide what comes next. But decide it from a place of stability instead of desperation." "You're sure?" Ethan asked. "Because if you want that Philadelphia school—" "I'm sure. There's work that needs doing here, students who need teaching, a community that's growing, and—" She paused. "A father I'm not ready to leave. Not yet." Father. She'd never called him that before. Guardian? Yes. Ethan, usually, but never father. The word landed with unexpected weight, filling spaces Ethan hadn't realized were empty. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice rough, "to be your father, even though I came to it backwards, through desperation instead of birth." "The best families are built, not born," Lucy replied. "You taught me that." Winter came hard that year, blanketing the ranch in snow that required constant vigilance and labor. Ethan worked alongside his crews breaking ice on water troughs, ensuring cattle had access to feed, maintaining structures against wind that howled down from the mountains like something alive and angry. It was brutal work, the kind that revealed character when conditions got difficult. Through it all, Lucy kept teaching. Even when temperatures dropped so low that breath froze in the air, She'd be in that barn with students, all of them bundled in coats and blankets, learning mathematics and reading and sciences that would serve them the rest of their lives. Parents started bringing hot coffee, taking turns heating stones they'd wrap in cloth for children to hold during lessons. The community rallied around Lucy's school because they recognized its value, and that recognition warmed Ethan more than any fire could. One January morning, a blizzard hit without warning, whiteout conditions that made navigation between buildings treacherous. Ethan was checking the livestock barn when he realized Lucy had gone to the schoolhouse before the storm intensified. Fear hit him like physical impact. She was alone out there with 7 children, and visibility had dropped to nothing. He grabbed rope, tied it around his waist, with the other end secured to the barn door, and headed into the storm. The wind was a living thing, trying to push him sideways, erase his sense of direction. But he kept moving forward, counting steps, following the path he'd walked hundreds of times until the schoolhouse materialized through the white chaos. Inside, he found Lucy had already organized her students. They were gathered in the center of the space, wrapped in every available blanket, sitting in a tight circle for warmth. Lucy looked up as he stumbled through the door, relief flashing across her face before she controlled it. "We're fine," she said calmly, though the tension in her shoulders told him she'd been worried. "I was just trying to decide if we should wait it out or try to reach the main buildings." "We wait," Ethan said. "Follow that rope when visibility improves. But right now, nothing's worth the risk of getting lost between here and safety." They spent the next 4 hours in that makeshift refuge while the storm raged outside. Lucy kept the children calm by turning it into an extended lesson on weather patterns and survival strategies. Ethan fed the small stove they used for heat, rationing fuel carefully, and wondered at his daughter's composure under pressure. She'd inherited her father's steady nerves and her mother's practical wisdom, and the combination made her formidable. When the storm finally broke and they made their way back along the rope to the main ranch, parents gathered their children with tears and relief. But every one of them thanked Lucy for keeping their kids safe and calm, and several mentioned that education wasn't just about book learning. It was about teaching young people how to think clearly when circumstances turned hard. That night, after everything had settled and they were back in their cabin with hot food and warm clothes, Lucy said, "I was scared. During the storm. Tried not to show it because the children needed someone steady, but I was terrified we'd made a terrible mistake trying to have school today." "But you kept your head anyway," Ethan replied. "Fear doesn't make you weak, Lucy. Acting despite fear is what makes you strong. You did exactly what needed doing." "I learned that from you," she said. "Watching you rebuild from nothing. Seeing you face down old demons every time you choose not to gamble, not to drink, not to give up when things get hard. You show me every day what real strength looks like." The compliment struck deep. Ethan had spent so many years being the cautionary tale, the man who'd thrown away every advantage and hit bottom hard. But here was Lucy telling him he'd become someone worth emulating. The transformation felt complete in a way he hadn't expected. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, bringing green to replace white and warmth to soften the winter's harsh edges. On Lucy's 15th birthday in April, the ranch threw a celebration that brought together everyone who'd come to care about the brilliant girl who taught their children. There was cake, actually 3 cakes, each made by different ranch families. There were gifts, books mostly, because everyone knew what Lucy valued. And there were testimonials from students about how Miss Lucy had changed their lives, had opened doors they hadn't known existed. Ethan stood on the edge of the celebration watching his daughter, and she was fully his daughter now, legal papers and heart in complete agreement, except gratitude and affection with her characteristic mixture of pleasure and slight embarrassment. She'd grown tall, nearly as tall as he was, and carried herself with a confidence that came from knowing her worth without needing to prove it. Thomas Grayson appeared beside him, 2 cups of punch in hand. He offered one to Ethan, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You've done well," Grayson said. "Both with the ranch and with that girl. 3 years ago, I took a chance on a desperate man with a letter from a child. Wasn't sure it was wise, but Lucy Harper's judgment had earned my respect. Seems it was well placed." "I got lucky," Ethan replied. "Lucy could have closed that door, could have been cautious and careful. Instead, she saved my life, then trusted me with hers." "Luck's part of it," Grayson agreed. But what you did with that luck, that's all you. Plenty of men get second chances and waste them. You built something real." He paused. "I'm getting old, Cole. Thinking about the future of this ranch. Been thinking Clayton's retirement left a gap, but watching you this past year, I'm not sure there's a gap anymore. You've made this place run better than it has in a decade." "Sir, let me finish. When I'm gone, and that won't be too many years now, this ranch needs someone who understands its value. Not just the financial value, but what it represents. Opportunity. Second chances. A place where people can build something that lasts." Grayson looked at him directly. "I want to know that when I'm dead, Grayson Ranch continues being that place, and I think you're the man to ensure it." The implication was clear, though Grayson was too practical to make explicit promises about inheritance. But he was telling Ethan that years of consistent work, of proving himself daily, had earned something beyond just employment, had earned trust, respect, and the possibility of a future that would extend beyond his lifetime. "I'd be honored to protect what you've built," Ethan said carefully. "This ranch gave me back my life. I won't forget that." "Good." Grayson nodded, then moved away to join the celebration, leaving Ethan standing there with the weight of possibilities settling over him like a mantle. That evening, after the guests had gone and the cake had been eaten and Lucy had retreated to her room with her new books, Ethan sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from desperate and dying in the dust to foreman of a ranch with a daughter who was changing lives through education. The distance between those two versions of himself seemed impossible, and yet he'd traveled it one day at a time, one choice at a time, one promise kept at a time. Lucy joined him after a while, sitting in the chair beside his, both of them comfortable with the silence that came from knowing each other thoroughly. "Thank you," she said finally. "For everything, for coming back when you could have kept running, for staying when things got hard, for being the father I needed even though you didn't sign up for it." "I did sign up for it," Ethan corrected. "The day I knocked on your door, I signed up for whatever came after. Just took me a while to understand what that meant." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Ethan considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. "I regret the years I wasted before, the people I hurt, the opportunities I destroyed, the man I let myself become. But from the moment you opened that door until now, no regrets. None. You gave me back my life, Lucy. Everything I've built since then is because you believed I was worth saving." "We saved each other," Lucy said, echoing what she'd told him months before. "You needed a reason to rebuild. I needed to remember I didn't have to survive alone." They sat in comfortable silence as full night settled over the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and haunting. Closer by, horses moved in their corrals, solid and real. And in between, the sounds of life, people settling for the night, voices calling goodnight, the small noises of a community at peace. 3 years ago, Ethan Cole had been dying in the dust with nothing left but regret and desperation. Now he sat on his own porch with a daughter who'd transformed a barn into a school and a future that stretched bright with possibility. The transformation wasn't magic. It was work. Consistent, daily, unglamorous work of choosing right over easy, building over destroying, showing up over giving up. And it was love. Not the easy kind that came from biological connection or romantic feeling, but the harder kind that came from seeing someone at their worst and believing they could become better. From receiving that belief as the unearned gift it was, and spending every day trying to prove it wasn't wasted. Years would continue passing. Lucy would grow and eventually leave for the education she deserved, whether in Philadelphia or Denver or somewhere else entirely. She'd become a doctor. Ethan was certain of that, and she'd be brilliant at it because she understood that healing was about more than just medicine. It was about seeing people's potential and helping them reach it. He'd grow older, gray-headed and stiff-jointed eventually, but he'd do it here at Grayson Ranch, maintaining the place that had given him back his dignity. Maybe when Thomas Grayson died, Ethan would inherit the ranch, or maybe he'd just continue managing it for whoever came next. Either way, he'd do the work because the work mattered, because it was how you built something that lasted. And throughout it all, no matter how far Lucy went or how long she was gone, she'd come back. Because they'd built something that distance couldn't erase. Family. Real family. The kind you created through consistent care and kept through mutual respect, and protected through the simple act of showing up, day after day, promise after promise, until the promises became the life you lived. "I love you, you know," Lucy said into the darkness, her voice soft but steady. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Because you failed, and then you didn't quit trying. That matters more than never failing in the first place." "I love you too," Ethan replied, and the words came easily because they were nothing but truth. "You saved my life the day you opened that door. You continue saving it every day I get to be your father." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who'd found each other at the edge of their respective ends and had built something beautiful from desperation and kindness. A knock on a door had become a lifetime. An act of mercy had become a family. And a dying man had learned that salvation sometimes came in the form of a 10-year-old girl with gray eyes and a stubborn belief that people deserved second chances if they were brave enough to take them seriously. The ghost town still stood in the distance, empty and eternal. But the life that had been lived there had moved forward, transformed into something new. The cabin remained, a monument to everything Lucy's parents had built and hoped for. Their books lined her shelves, their lessons lived in how she taught. Their love had been the foundation on which she'd learned to offer that same love to a stranger who'd needed it desperately. And in that offering, in that one act of opening a door when caution would have said to keep it closed, Lucy Harper and Ethan Cole had proven something that mattered. That kindness wasn't weakness. That believing in people's capacity to change wasn't naive. That family wasn't about blood. It was about choice, commitment, and the daily work of showing up for each other when it would be easier to walk away. The night deepened. The stars burned bright. And on a porch at Grayson Ranch, a father and daughter sat together in the comfortable silence of people who'd built something real from almost nothing, and knew that what they'd created would last not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Somewhere in the darkness, a door still stood in a ghost town, but the knock that had once echoed against it had long since transformed into something greater. A life rebuilt, a family formed, and proof that sometimes the end of everything is just the beginning of something better.